Hello again and welcome back to our course on PowerPoint 2019. Now, before we jump into creating a brand new presentation, I just want to take a little bit of time to review some presentation tips and guidelines that are really going to help you when it comes to creating that very first PowerPoint presentation. And the thing I'd like to talk to you about first is the use of colours. Now, when it comes to the use of colour in your presentation, this is something you really need to give some thought to, preferably before you start creating your presentation. It's really important that the colour scheme that you go with, that everything ties together. So from the headings, the background colours, any bullets that you use, all of the colours should tie together nicely so that it looks like a cohesive presentation. And when it comes to the types of colours that you should be using, I would always say that subtle colours create trust with your audience. So we're talking about colours like blues, browns, blacks. Also, bright colours tend to create a dramatic impact. So if you really want something to stand out and draw people's attention, then red is always a good colour to use for that. It's also good to consider where you're going to be doing your presentation. So if you're going to be doing this or presenting it to an audience, it's worth considering the light in the room, and you want to make sure that you're using colours that can be easily seen by everyone in the audience. So if it's a particularly bright room, maybe you want to darken those colours, or if it's quite a dark room, you might want to use more like a white background and dark text. So it's worth checking out the room first just to see the kinds of colours that you should use in your presentation. I would also say to use good contrast colours in your presentation as well. And what I mean by that is if you have, for example, a blue background, then something like neon green font is not going to look good on a blue background. You want to maybe stick to a light background with dark text. So of course, white and black is always good for that, or other good contrast colours. So really think about that and make sure that the text is clear so that people can see it. Another important point is to never use red and green next to each other, and this is for people who suffer with colour blindness. So red and green can easily be confused, and they can also tend to look the same to people who have problems distinguishing red from green. So make sure that you don't put them next to each other on a presentation. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's important to keep your colours consistent throughout the presentation. If you don't, it just ends up like it's something that you've thrown together without too much thought. So do make sure that everything flows through nicely. So now let's move on to talking about fonts that you use in your presentation. As a general rule, your title should be size 44, which might seem quite large to you, but again, remember, if you're presenting this particularly in a large room, then you're going to want to make sure that that font is big enough so that people, even in the back of the room, can see it clearly. So a general guideline would be title size 44 and any subtitles that you have size 32. If you've just got regular text on the screen, then size 28 is good. So the text that you can see on my screen right now for these bullet points is all size 28. In general, I would steer clear of very small fonts. So for example, if you were working in Word and you were typing a document, you might find that font size 10, 11 or 12 is perfectly fine for that. But when it comes to your PowerPoint presentation, you want to make it a lot bigger. I would also say don't use more than 3 different fonts per presentation. In general, when I'm doing a presentation, I tend to stick to the same font throughout just because I think that looks better. But if you do require more than one font, then try not to go above 3. Otherwise, again, it can start to look a little bit messy and a little bit like you've just thrown it together. Let's now talk about words, so the words that you have on your slides. Again, another general guideline is 6 to 8 words per line. The thing that I've found when I see people's presentations is that people tend to like to put everything they're going to say on the slide, and really that's not the intention of PowerPoint. PowerPoint is really there to serve as a reminder, some bullet points, some notes for you. So keep it short, keep it sweet. It's just there so that you can elaborate on the points that are on the screen. So keep it short. If you do have a lot of text that you don't necessarily want to put on the slide, then it's a good idea to utilize the handout. So you can add more text on there if required, and you can hand those out to your audience either before the session or after the session. And I always say that less text is better. You really don't want to confront people with a wall of words. I think we've all heard that phrase, death by PowerPoint, when you're kind of sitting there in a presentation and all you have is this big screen full of words. It's quite hard to read what's on the screen and concentrate on what the speaker is saying. So less text is better. And a way that I kind of combat that when I'm doing a presentation is that I tend to use images instead of words. So I might have a nice big image on the screen that illustrates my point, and then I will talk through the image and I will say what I need to say without having it all written on the slide. So just some points there to consider when you're thinking about the placement of your words and what words you're going to put on your slides. Bullet points. Now, you can see here in this slide, I have some bullet points. And again, in general, 4 to 6 bulleted items per slide. You don't have to cram as many bulleted items on a slide as possible. If you do have quite a few, then please just use another slide, okay? And also remember that you can have up to 5 levels of bullets. Sometimes that's quite nice to use as well because it just gives it a little bit of structure. And again, to keep things consistent, if you're going to use some kind of picture or even a symbol like I have here, make sure you use the same bullet picture per level. Again, just to keep things consistent and flowing through. Templates. Now, again, I'm using a template here in this presentation, and you may decide to choose one of the ones that are available in PowerPoint, or you might have your own, maybe your own company template that you like to use. But in general, I tend to keep my templates really, really simple. I don't want too many bells and whistles and things that are going to distract away from my presentation. I also try to limit the number of lines, textures, and other effects. I think there is a little bit of a temptation, particularly when we've just learned some new cool tricks in PowerPoint, to try and add as much into our presentations as possible. And sometimes really the old adage, less is more. So keep it minimal, keep it simple. I'm a big fan of using images and graphics in my PowerPoint presentations. As I mentioned, sometimes I just like to have a large image on the screen and then talk through my points. So I would definitely recommend looking at the way that you can use graphics, pictures, those icons, 3D models, and also charts to enhance the template and the presentation. And again, going back to text slides, try to avoid using more than 3 in a row. So again, don't just have 10 slides full of plain text to present to people. Try and break it up with the odd image slide as well, just to make it a little bit more interesting and prevent people from snoozing off when you're in the middle of your presentation. So that's it. Those are the major tips I have when creating presentations. What we're going to do in the next section is we're going to jump in and we're going to start creating our first PowerPoint presentation, bearing in mind those tips that we've just learned. So join me for that.